Can you really live a life without mistakes? At first, it sounds perfect. Always the right choices, no pain, no disappointment. But the truth is that mistakes aren't weakness. From a scientific point of view, they're actually the fuel of our growth. Without mistakes, there would be no discoveries, no progress, not even life as we know it. And today, we're going to break down why mistakes are nothing to be afraid of. If you enjoy seeing everyday things through the lens of science, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. So, what is a mistake, scientifically speaking? In everyday life, we usually think of mistakes as something negative, a failure, a setback. But science sees them very differently. A mistake isn't the end of the road. It's a signal, a built-in system that helps us learn and adapt. In psychology, a mistake is defined as the gap between what we expected to happen and what actually happens. In simple terms, we predict one outcome, but reality surprises us. That gap is the moment we realize something didn't go the way we thought it would. And here's where it gets really fascinating. What happens inside the brain? Neuroscience calls this a prediction error. Your brain is constantly forecasting the future, what words someone will say next, what food will taste like, what will happen when you press a button on the remote. When the prediction doesn't match reality, a special error signal is triggered. And this signal isn't punishment. It's guidance. Update your model of the world. Try a new strategy. Take a simple example. You grab the TV remote, press a button, and expect the channel to change. But nothing happens. Instantly, your brain detects the mismatch and kicks into adaptation mode. Maybe the batteries are dead. Maybe you pressed the wrong button. Maybe the TV itself needs fixing. One of the key regions involved here is the anterior cingulate cortex. On brain scans, it lights up whenever we make mistakes. It's part of a complex feedback loop that prevents us from repeating the same failed actions over and over and pushes us to search for new solutions. So mistakes aren't glitches in the system. They are the system. Our brains are literally designed to learn from the mismatch between what we expect and what actually happens. Evolution itself is impossible without mistakes. In biology, those mistakes are called mutations, tiny errors that happen when DNA is copied. At first glance, they might seem random, even dangerous. But in reality, these small glitches have been the driving force of evolution. Every time a cell divides, it has to copy billions of letters of genetic code. And sometimes, there's a typo, a mutation. Most of these typos don't matter. Some are harmful, but every so often one turns out to be useful. And when it is, it gets passed on, generation after generation, slowly reshaping an entire species. One of the classic examples comes from nature, the peppered moth. Originally, these moths had light-colored wings that helped them blend in with tree bark. But during the Industrial Revolution in England, soot from factories darkened the trees. That's when a mutation appeared. Some moths developed darker wings. In a clean forest, that would have been a disadvantage. They'd stand out. But in smoky, soot-covered forests, it became a huge advantage. Birds were less likely to spot them, which meant the dark-colored moths survived more often and passed down their mistaken coloring to the next generation. That's how natural selection works. A genetic error turns into a survival strategy. And without this endless chain of mutations, evolution simply wouldn't exist. Which means, neither would we. Scientists sometimes describe mutations as nature's experiments. Millions of trials, millions of errors, and only a handful that actually work. But those few are what gave rise to the incredible diversity of life on Earth, from bacteria to human beings. So mistakes aren't enemies of life. They're the foundation of growth itself. Without them, Earth might still be covered only in simple single-celled organisms. And we'd never even be here asking the question, what is a mistake? Mistakes aren't just part of evolution. They're also the foundation of how our brain works. Every time we mess up, the brain releases dopamine. Most people call dopamine the pleasure chemical, but that's not quite right. In this case, dopamine is actually a learning signal. It's the brain's way of saying, hey, your prediction didn't match the result. Time to adjust. That's how the cycle works. Mistake correction reinforcement of the new action. It's the reason we learn to walk, to talk, to play instruments, to solve problems. Without mistakes, we'd stay stuck, like a child who never falls, and therefore never learns to walk. History is full of people who turned mistakes into stepping stones for success. Take Thomas Edison. When he was inventing the light bulb, he ran thousands of failed experiments. But he famously said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I found 1,000 ways that don't work. For him, every mistake wasn't a defeat, it was progress. The same attitude was echoed by Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players in history. He once said, I've missed more than 9,000 shots. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I was trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And neuroscience backs them up. Mistakes activate the brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to rewire and form new connections. The more we try, stumble, and try again, the stronger our skills become. So mistakes aren't bugs in the system. They are the system. Every miss, every failure, is actually an investment in future success. Is it possible to live a life without mistakes? Technically, yes. Imagine someone who only ever does what they already know how to do. They take the same routes, say the same words, tackle only the tasks they're 100% confident in. In that kind of life, mistakes would disappear, but so would growth. Science shows us that mistakes happen precisely when we step into the unknown, when the brain moves beyond the familiar and faces uncertainty. To eliminate mistakes completely would mean eliminating learning itself. Think of it like this: a chess player who always plays the same opening. He never slips up because his moves are automatic. But he'll never beat a stronger opponent, because real progress requires taking risks and, yes, making mistakes. Or picture a child who never falls. That child also never learns to walk. A player who never loses? It means they never face anyone as good or better than themselves. A scientist who's afraid to fail? They'll never make a discovery. A life without mistakes may be safe, but it's also static. It's like playing the same melody over and over. Sure, there are no wrong notes, but there's no real music either. So when we ask, can we eliminate mistakes? The answer is yes, but the cost is far too high. You lose growth, new ideas, and the very energy that drives life forward. That's why science doesn't see mistakes as enemies. It sees them as inevitable and essential parts of progress. So why shouldn't we be afraid of mistakes? In psychology, there's a term called catastrophizing. It's when we exaggerate the consequences of our errors. We think that if we slip up, everything will collapse. Our career, our reputation, our relationships. But science shows that in most cases, mistakes are simply stepping stones on the way to the right solution. Our brain is wired to use mistakes as feedback. A mistake is basically the brain's way of saying, try a different approach. And through this process, we gradually refine our strategies until they become more accurate and effective. History is full of mistakes that turned into breakthroughs. One of the most famous examples is the discovery of penicillin. Alexander Fleming left some petri dishes of bacteria unattended and noticed that mold had started to grow in one of them. Instead of throwing away what looked like a ruined experiment, he paid attention to something odd. The bacteria around the mold were dying. That so-called mistake led to the world's first antibiotic and ended up saving millions of lives. So mistakes aren't just not a catastrophe. They're often the very source of our greatest insights. In fact, science even has a word for this: serendipity, happy discoveries made by accident. And it's not limited to science labs. In daily life, a mistake on a project can spark a better idea. A mistake in communication can teach us to listen more carefully. A mistake in a career path can reveal that we're heading in the wrong direction. That's why fearing mistakes is like fearing your own growth. A mistake isn't a sentence, it's a tool. Sometimes painful, sometimes surprising, but almost always useful. From a scientific perspective, mistakes aren't enemies. They're actually our most reliable teachers. So, can you live a life without mistakes? Technically, yes. You could live cautiously, always choosing the familiar and the predictable. But that would be a life without growth, without discovery, and without real happiness. From a scientific perspective, mistakes aren't weakness. They're part of our nature, the very engine of evolution and learning. Mistakes are what make us smarter, braver, and stronger. Which means we shouldn't fear them, we should use them. Now here's my question for you. What mistake in your life turned out to be more valuable than success? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read them. And if this perspective resonates with you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.